Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the hidden psychology behind human choices. We make thousands of decisions every single day, but how much do we really understand the machinery driving them? Whether it's hitting the snooze button for the third time or buying something online you definitely don't need, we're going to bridge the microscopic biology of your brain all the way to the artificial intelligence sitting in your pocket right now. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by unpacking the illusion of rationality, take a look inside the choosing brain, and then explore the mental shortcuts and biases that govern our actions. From there, we'll examine a very modern problem, the AI dependency trap, before finally looking at the future of choice. All right, Section 1, the illusion of rationality. So, I want you to really ask yourself, are your choices truly rational? When you're, evaluating options and making decisions, are you really acting like some supercomputer maximizing utility? Or are you heavily influenced by cognitive limits and emotions? It turns out that disconnect between what we should do and what we actually do drives literally everything, from terrible financial choices to why we constantly procrastinate. To figure out exactly why this happens, we have to look at the dual process theory. This was made famous by psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, and it absolutely revolutionized how we understand human judgment. It basically says we operate using two very distinct cognitive systems. The stark contrast between these two systems is pretty extreme. System 1, fast, intuitive, and completely automatic. It just happens effortlessly. System 2, on the other hand, is slow, deliberate, and highly analytical. It takes real focus. And because System 2 burns so much mental energy, our brains kind of just default to the easy, automatic System 1. Basically, we trade accuracy for speed. Moving right along to Section 2, inside the choosing brain. Decision-making inside your head is like this wildly complex corporate committee. First up, you got the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Think of this as the accountant, constantly crunching the subjective value of things, whether it's a slice of pizza or $100 bill. Meanwhile, your striatum is the hype man, pumping out dopamine to update your expectations. And finally, the lateral prefrontal cortex steps in as the CEO to make the ultimate executive choice. Now, here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. For decades, scientists thought this was a strict hierarchy, like a one-way street from your senses straight up to the frontal cortex. But a major 2026 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science totally flipped the script. They found that brain decisions actually rely on interconnected feedback loops. What this means is that in your brain's earliest sensory processing areas, the parts handling basic touch or sight, information doesn't just travel in a straight line. Rapid feedback loops let higher-level brain regions literally alter how you perceive things in real time. It's called top-down regulation. Your perception and your choices are being organized at the exact same time. It's essentially a continuous, dynamic conversation happening across your whole brain. Okay, Section 3, mental shortcuts and biases. Because our brains are hardwired to save energy, we rely heavily on mental shortcuts, also known as heuristics. This idea goes back to a truly groundbreaking 1974 science paper by Tversky and Kahneman. They proved that instead of doing complex mental math, we just use a few basic rules of thumb. They're super useful for getting through the day, sure, but they also lead to massive systematic errors. Let's look at the representativeness heuristic, which was famously shown in the Dick the Engineer experiment. Subjects were told about a room with 70 engineers and 30 lawyers. Then, they were given a generic description of Dick, saying he was married, well-liked, and had no kids. When asked if Dick was an engineer or a lawyer, people guessed 50-50. They completely ignored the actual 70-30 statistical base rate just because the generic description didn't scream lawyer or engineer. We literally throw math out the window in favor of a stereotype. Another massive mental shortcut is anchoring. This happens when you start with an initial value, your anchor, and then try to adjust from there to get your final answer. The catch? We almost never adjust enough. Your brain gets completely stuck on that starting point. And I mean stuck. Even if the anchor is totally random, like a number from a spinning wheel of fortune, it still messes with your final guess. As Tversky and Kahneman put it, since adjustment from the starting point is typically insufficient, the final estimates remain too close to the probabilities of the elementary events. Simply put, the very first piece of information you see severely biases your final judgment. Keep that in mind because it is exactly what makes modern technology so dangerous. Which brings us to Section 4, the AI dependency trap.
We're going to connect that 1970s psychology right to the 2020s crisis of artificial intelligence in healthcare.
Consider this number, 11.3%. A recent JAMA study tested what happens when physicians are given intentionally biased AI predictions. Their diagnostic accuracy dropped by exactly 11.3%. But wait, here's the scariest part. Their accuracy plummeted even when the doctors were given the exact explanations for the AI's reasoning. The doctors anchored to the AI's output. Their analytical system 2 thinking was totally bypassed, and their judgment basically just folded. And we really cannot afford to anchor to these systems because of this next number, 52.1%. A massive 2025 meta-analysis in Nature Digital Medicine looked at 83 different studies and found that generative AI's overall diagnostic accuracy is just 52.1%. To put that into perspective, trusting an AI chatbot with your medical diagnosis is literally a coin flip. The reality here is impossible to ignore. When you compare AI models directly to expert specialist physicians, the AI trails by almost 16 percentage points. In fact, a 2026 Oxford study, which happens to be the largest real-world evaluation we have so far, showed that patients using AI chatbots did no better than someone just doing a standard Google search. Algorithmic pattern matching is just not the same thing as real clinical reasoning. Look, chatbots are just generating statistically likely word sequences based on their training data. Think about what they absolutely cannot do. They can't read a patient's body language. They can't intuitively ask that crucial follow-up question you forgot to bring up. They can't weigh complex, nuanced life context. And maybe worst of all, they are designed to confidently spit out an answer every single time. They have absolutely no accountability, and they literally cannot just say, "I don't know." Finally, Section 5, the future of choice. So, what happens when our wonderfully complex, easily biased biological brains collide with incredibly confident algorithms? Well, the Independent Patient Safety Group ECRI made it crystal clear. The misuse of AI chatbots is their #1 health technology hazard for 2026. They've documented chatbots literally inventing body parts and suggesting dangerous medical device placements, all while sounding perfectly professional and authoritative. When we let an algorithm do the heavy lifting for our System 2 thinking, the results can be catastrophic. Now, I'm not saying we should throw the technology in the trash. AI is a fantastic tool to augment our judgment, but it is a terrible substitute for it. A Stanford study actually showed that when trained physicians use AI as an assistant, like to surface medical literature or flag drug interactions, while still applying their own real-world experience, patient outcomes improve. The human simply has to remain in the loop. We've explored the illusion of our own rationality, the incredible, lightning-fast feedback loops inside our brains, the mental shortcuts that quietly steer us, and the very real traps of modern AI. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Knowing the cognitive quirks and hardwired biases of your own brain, how often are you outsourcing your critical judgment to an algorithm? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope it makes you think twice the next time you have a choice to make.